Hello, dear future thinkers, design leaders, and change makers around the world. I'm Ekaterina, co-founder of Future London Academy. Welcome to another episode of our podcast with our incredible, amazing, fantastic, mind-blowing guest today, Travis Isaacs. Travis is Vice President and Chief Design Officer at Webex Collaboration at Cisco. How are you, Travis, today?
I am fantastic. Katrina, I'm hoping this third cup of espresso will help me match your incredible energy today. I am really excited to be here and share my passion for design with this audience.
And I would love actually to start with, I suppose, your story. The bio mentions you've been promoted to Chief Design Officer after 5 years. And that's a probably most mysterious and mystical thing for a lot of people. How do you get this sweet promotion of Chief Design Officer? Could you tell us a little bit of a story? How did it happen? And also, as far as I understand, the role didn't even exist. So how does one get promoted to a role that doesn't exist?
It's a great question. And I will confess something to this audience. I spent most of my career avoiding design leadership roles. I really just wanted to be a practitioner. So that was me. I just really wanted to focus on design where all of my problems, began and ended in Figma or Sketch or InVision or whatever tool I was using at the time. And I felt like I hit kind of the ceiling, both professionally, but also the fulfillment that I got as a practitioner. What I really mean by that is the kinds of problems that I wanted to solve weren't so much about my practice or the execution of the design or what the design was. I really wanted to influence the what. Like, what are we building? Who are we building it for? That sort of moment kind of occurred to me when I joined here at Cisco many years ago. It seems forever ago now. I actually came here as a product manager. And the reason I went into product because I had this kind of career crisis of like, have I explored all avenues of design as a practitioner? And so I joined Microsoft as a product manager and came here as a product manager. And the realization that I had is that I was not going to get what I want out of my career, and I was not going to have the impact on design in my current role. And that's not to say that in order to grow your career, you have to become a manager. In fact, I would recommend if you don't want to become a manager, like don't go down that path. You will burn yourself out. You will not be fulfilled. But for me, that was a leap that I was willing to take. I came here as a product manager. I mentioned that, and I saw an opportunity to really not just influence the way our products are designed, but it was the only way for us to achieve our goals as a business. In the bio, and thank you for reading all of that. It's super awkward to hear people talk about you, but our product wasn't in a good state, and I really wanted to change that. I knew I couldn't change it alone. Part of what I did was I actually went to my senior leadership. I, begged and persisted to get a meeting and really started having a conversation about how do we change this? And here's what I think we should do to go and change it. And it was really not about my personal career ambitions. It really was, what does the business need? And what role do I think design can sort of play in that? And that was a conversation that went on for months. I got like a lot of, I don't agree with you, or no, not now, but I kept having the conversation. And I got an opportunity to lead a small team. It wasn't that small. It didn't feel that small at the time. It was 12 people. As sort of okay, go address and fix this area and we'll see how it goes. That was in 2018. The story between then and now is not that different, but there were a couple of key moments that had to happen in there. And I think for your audience, I found myself in a position of there was no chief design officer. In fact, design was very fragmented and decentralized in the business that I currently within at Cisco. And so this notion of not only are we going to have this chief design officer function, but we're going to disrupt an organizational chart and bring design together was not met with an instant yes. It really was, there was a lot of pushback, and the pushback wasn't really from my skip level or the senior leaders in my team. The pushback was from other design teams and from where they reported to. And so that story, I think, is what is going to be interesting to talk about, of how I approach that, how I talk to my senior leadership team about that. And I think what you'll find is that either these roles exist and you're, as a leader, you're advocating yourself to be the obvious choice to be the next person in line for that, or in my case, the role didn't exist. And you really have to learn a new vocabulary and a new set of tools to go and do that. And that was really what I focused on over the last 4 years. It was really taking off my practitioner hat, but not losing that, but really understanding what are the needs of the business and how do I make that connection between how I influence design, who my first team is, and finding that person who will go and listen and frankly sort of, take a chance on me to go do it. And so it was a lot about learning about that and also being willing to be professionally accountable for, if I'm advocating that we rethink about how design works, we create pathways for design to happen, and I professionally will be accountable for the success or failure of that. I found myself out of my element in so many ways, and a lot of the growth and learning um, was really around that. It wasn't so much about my craft or the practice of design. It was all those other things. It was learning how to be, a business executive. And I often found myself in a very foreign place in meetings I'd never been in, and having responsibilities that I never had before. And I think that is not often talked about. I think everyone, not everyone, but I think when you see someone who has a senior design leader role or chief design officer, you imagine yourself the end state, and the middle of it is actually pretty lonely and a little bit scary.
I love how you describe this journey, and it's definitely not a straightforward journey. I do feel like from the outside, it always feels so magical, like someone gets this brilliant position and kind of they made it. That's it. But it's actually just the beginning of that very, very difficult journey. So you follow up questions on the story that you shared, because I feel like that's the kind of the beginning of how it happened. Um, I would like to hear a bit more about the practicality of, you mentioned that the senior people in your team, the leadership people that you talk to about this potential thing. And I do believe that sometimes it's so important to identify who are those people, because sometimes it is a CEO, sometimes it's not a CEO, and who will be your allies to create this position, or who potentially you can at least have a conversation with. So who were those people? Like, in which department were their roles that you started having this conversation with?
I tell the story that if you break down user experience design really into its fundamentals, your job is to, you know, understand a problem or pain point of a person who's not you, a persona. And you use the tools that you have to create metaphors to solve those problems in a way that they will understand and be successful with. Like, that really is user experience at its heart. And I think as you're growing as a leader, whether it be a design leader or any kind of leader, that it's a design problem to go and solve. And so for me, that who are enablers, who are attractors, who do I need to go and influence to take this sort of next step in how we think about and execute and prioritize design, I really treated this as a design problem. And part of that is, understanding, well, what's at stake for my skip level, executive leader? What is motivating them? What are they afraid of losing if they get wrong? How do I give them the easy button to go and do some of these things? And so that process becomes really, really important. This is a design problem. It's just you're not in pixels, right? It's people and organizational processes and operations, and all of these things around that are things for you to go and consider and solve for. And in my case, it really was coming at this from both ends. One, there would be no, I would not have this role had I not delivered positive, like, business outcomes. And so the foundation for that is you really do have to deliver. And so the first kind of leap back into design that I took in my first leadership role, I had to deliver and I had to show that under my leadership, the culture got better, the outcomes got better, the design got better, and the creatives on my team also got better. Like that's table stakes, so to speak. You have to go and do that. And so your fundamentals as a leader become really, really important. And part of that, I had to make sure that if, a leader comes and asks my team, like, hey, how did this go? They had a positive experience and they did good work and they grew. And then from there, one of the things I really enjoy about working here is everything we do is based on a triad: product, engineering, and design. We all have kind of equal stakes in what we do here. And so really forming those relationships between product, engineering, and design were the second thing that I really had to go and tackle. So keep my team happy, but then also make sure that the other parts of my triad feel really empowered. Do they feel like when design gets involved, outcomes are better? Do engineers feel like we're making their jobs easier because the specifications are better, or there's less rework, or we're really confident that this is what the customer wants? From product standpoint, do they feel like, the earlier that they involve design, the less risky our investments are, the outcomes get better? That really is really, really important. And that's kind of from the bottom. From the top, like, you can't just go and, at least I would never go to an executive and say, hey, you should form a chief design officer role. You should give it to me and pull everyone together. It'll be fine. Like, you will not have success there, but you have to start having those conversations. And frankly, this conversation was ongoing. I got many no's, or many not nows, when I started having this conversation. And every time I learned a little bit. And the first time I had this conversation, it really was focused on how the organization will work, how I would reorg and the teams I would add to it and how I would structure it. But it really wasn't in a way that, as a business executive who owns a number at the end of the day, it wasn't something that they really cared about. And I had to sort of go back each time and really think about, well, how will this impact the business? And how do I make sure that if this person takes a chance on me, they're going to be really confident that I will deliver the outcome? And so how I identified them was, again, like in my case, I was advocating for, I want to consolidate many design orgs, 4, 5, 6 design orgs, and they were all decentralized within the business that I am in today. And who was the common leader among those? And I really sort of started there. You want to have the conversation at the top, but you want to make sure that if they, ask around, everyone's going to say, oh yeah, like, design got so much better and I'm in support of this. Let me give you an example of how this works better. And so I couldn't do one or the other. I think if you just focused on your immediate cross-functional team, I don't think you would have anyone thinking about how all these things fit together. I think if you also just started at the top by going to an executive or a CEO, I don't think you would have the credibility that you've thought about this, you've demonstrated success, and now you're asking to scale the success.
Thank you for explaining this kind of bottom-up and top-down approach. I 100% agree with you. I think you need to show something tangible to the C-level before they can even consider this big transformation, but also you do need to have this big vision of where it's all going to kind of start paving that path. Would love to dive a little bit deeper in a few things that you mentioned there, because I think it's so fascinating, first of all, what you've done. We had lots of questions about metrics and examples and all of that. Let's dive into a few of those in the story. You mentioned that you wanted to show that kind of tangible improvements, that whether it is the engineering team that was coming to you, kind of everything was smoother. First of all, did you set up any particular metrics for that? You already knew, I want to reduce engineering time, whatever, from this to this, or whatever, design time working on things. First of all, did you set them up and were you tracking them? How did this all work? Because I think it's easy to say, everything became better. Look, I'm doing great work, but how do you then communicate it to people maybe who were not even involved in the project? So maybe the engineer felt like it was better, but the leadership team never seen the project. So how do you understand what you should be looking for? And then how do you communicate it back to the leadership? Maybe you have a few examples of those that you actually did.
I would start by saying everyone's situation is different. And I think depending on the relationship between design, product engineering, and cross-functional teams in your organization, this might be different. And in my case, the relationship was a little tense, if I'm being honest with you. Again, when I started, design was very decentralized. And so you had a wide range of maturity levels in terms of design maturity, but then that cross-functional maturity of how design, product, and engineering work together. And so really my focus at first was just how is the relationship going? And I really started with the goal of, if someone asks my nearest engineering director, what is it like working with my team? They only have positive things to say. And that's a very admittedly subjective and lo-fi kind of way to start, but that's really where I started. In my case, that relationship was just not working, and there were so many fundamentals of just trust building and respect for ownership and boundaries and all those things. I really just wanted to make sure that if I got these teams in a room together, it would be a productive kind of relationship. Part of that was I went and interviewed like every engineer I could go and who would talk to me. And I interviewed every designer and every product manager who would talk to me. And this took months. And this first kind of milestone is I held a retrospective. I got everyone in the room. It felt awkward, but ended up being amazing. But I really took the opportunity, again, thinking this is a design problem. I painted this picture of like, here's what this team is saying, and here's what this team is saying. And in fact, most of these things are the same. So we want the same things. And just forming that basic foundation of trust in the relationship was really, really important. Now that has evolved over the last couple of years, and there are lots of data that we collect to ensure the health of that relationship. And I'll get to the maybe the business metrics sort of at the end, because those are also very important. But there are a couple of things that my team in design, we do to make sure that that relationship is strong and we show up to our senior leaders. One, whenever we talk about when we celebrate our work, we celebrate it along with product and engineering. We show up as a triad. We did this thing together. Design is a team sport. We could not do it without our partners. And that's just a ceremony that we do as much as we can. We really want to bring everyone along. Next, every year we measure the health of our org. We have we call it an org health survey. And part of that org health survey is one, just what is the experience like of the creatives in my team? Like, how do they view me, my performance as a leader, the clarity of their roles? And then a lot of it is around ways of working. And we really try to quantify what is your experience working in this team, but working across product and across engineering. How do you have what you need to do your role? What don't you have? And so we objectively get this report of what's it like being in this team and what's it like trying to accomplish your job as this team. And, last year we got the whole org to opt into doing this. And this was such an important thing for me because, again, part of the passion I have for this job and the part of what I feel like my responsibility is focusing on the ways of working. Because as your scope of a design leader grows, the kinds of challenges you have, you will depend on more people to get them done. And priorities are important and metrics are super important, but ways of working are really important. And I think a lot of leaders get to the director point and they can't go any further because that relationship that they have, they don't invest enough time on focusing on how we get work done. And so the fact that the whole org kind of opted into, yes, we're going to inspect the ways of working and take action on it, was a huge milestone for us. And designers and creatives and researchers, I think, are wired differently. Like, we're very comfortable talking about our feelings. Engineering and product, like, it's not second nature to them. And so the fact that we get this whole org to go and do that was an incredible achievement. In terms of the business metrics, there are several things that I would not say my team owns wholly, because, again, design is a team sport. You can't just have great design. Like go to market, performance, stability, uptime, trust, like all these things come together. And so for me, that portfolio of things looks like we care a lot about NPS. We care a lot about CSAT. We care a lot about specific design measures and metrics like SUS, System Usability Scale. We have SUS that focused on just the accessibility of our product. And so there are a lot of measures that sort of capture the usability or user experience of our product, but then what role do we play into customer sentiment, trust, the buying cycle? And then I would also say there are very specific targeted measures that we care about, like the adoption of investments that we have made. And so if I think, at the business level, things like NPS and CSAT, but then when I think about individual investments that we are making, we really care about adoption. For us being a productivity tool, we don't look at just raw usage numbers. We look at things like how many times per week did this persona or user type use this thing? Or what behavior did this user stop doing because we introduced this new thing, especially with lots of new AI-driven productivity. There's a little bit of a shift happening there. But yeah, those are the things that I really think about. Like if you ask me what my report card is, it certainly is sort of the health and culture of my team, ways of working and how we show up cross-functionally, and then how we support and are accountable for things that drive our business.
I love how you described it. And I have to say, you're probably one of the first people who started answering the question about metrics with a human. And I absolutely agree with you that is something that sometimes is getting completely missed in this conversation about ROI in design, giving design visibility. But at the end of the day, if no one wants to work with you as a design team, none of it matters. No matter how genius you are, how great of an impact, if no one wants to work with you, then you cannot succeed within the global organization.
Can I just add to that actually?
Mhm.
And I want to make sure I emphasize this point because we talked about this a couple of months ago, but this is where I often find myself in unfamiliar discussions. In that, one, I am incredibly grateful of the position I have and the influence and visibility that I have. And I am, in my position, I am seen as a business leader and I am a stakeholder, right? I am ultimately partially accountable for the success of the business that I'm working in right now. Having the perspective and being a creative and thinking so, having that, my heart sort of be at its core, like how do I, rely on human empathy to remove a problem or a pain point for someone. I have found myself being the only person in the room who speaks up about that. That's not to say that my other colleagues don't care about it. But I think if you are in the situation where you've been promoted to a senior design leader role or senior research leader role, I think you have to be prepared for you're bringing a really different human-centered perspective to your organization. And you should embrace that. And you should also not be surprised that it's not met with like, oh, great, you're here. Because I think the reality is you will often be in a room where like we've never had you in this room before and we've been fine up until this point. Like, who cares? And again, that did not happen to me. But it can happen to me. My team is fantastic, my cross-functional team. But I think that having that perspective is what makes you special. And it's what you uniquely bring to the room when you find yourself in the room. It will feel weird. Like it'll feel weird initially, and that's okay. I think you keep doing it. And I think the position and the influence that I enjoy in my new team is that like, hey, let's make it weird and let's talk about the ways of working. And let's talk about the culture and health of the team and let's get feedback of like how do people feel working together. And the first year of that, people were like, why are we doing this? And now like it's people come to me for that. And I really sort of appreciate having brought that perspective. The table has turned too. Like I'm in meetings where we're discussing business financials and in quarter renewal rates and all the stuff where I was completely out of my element. And if you would have asked, me 10 years ago, like, how many meetings will you be in where you're looking over a spreadsheet? I would say zero. And that's actually not true, and that's part of my job, and that's the growth that I had to overcome to earn that spot in the room.
Thank you for sharing this. I do believe that creatives and designers, you're right, have so many skills that are very organic to us as part of our jobs and part of why we chose the job in the first place, which is empathy and kind of understanding for the user, trying to understand the context, trying to create a great experience and emotion. So you're right, we should not neglect those skills that we built throughout the career and actually utilize them to their potential the more senior we get. And they're just not applied to design in a traditional sense. They're applied at a
Yes.
strategic level. I think this is just, it reminded me of something that when you're working in a creative agency and you pick which freelancers to use, most likely or most often you don't choose by the highest quality, but the ones that you like the most to work with, because it's always a stressful project when you need to get freelancers in. It's usually something you don't have enough space for the team, so you pick people who are trustworthy, who are reliable, who will make your team feel great about the work they're doing. So you choose, yes, they need to be good at what they do, but primarily think about how to make it work as a team. And that basically seems like it's a great strategy overall within the organization. If you want to have a bigger impact, if you want to have bigger problems to solve and be in charge of more interesting projects, then you need to build this very human trust and relationship that you are a good person or a good team to work with, and you can be trusted, and you are a nice bunch and people will enjoy having you as part of any project. So why would they not involve you in this big strategic project if you just bring all great things from numbers to just great experience of on a human level? I would like to dive now into the second part that you mentioned, which is metrics. And you already mentioned a few, and there are lots of questions and conversation. What shall we measure? What are the KPIs? What's ROI in design? And I love that you mentioned a few, but I also believe that with metrics, there at certain point you get to a level where there are too many metrics, and therefore you don't know which ones to report on, which one are the most important for the leadership team. Which ones, or how many at least, do you look at, and which ones did you find the most important for you as a design team, and which ones the leadership teams look at the most and understand the most?
I like that distinction. I think there are metrics that my team uses to do their job. I found in my experience, when I ask my team, what do you need? Oh, we need more data. And many times, actually, you have access to all the data that you possibly need. In fact, there's a overwhelming amount of data that my team has access to. And where we've had to sort of learn and experiment there is really thinking about, well, what are the right questions to go and ask in terms of one, what assumptions do you have about the behavior that this user is doing or not doing? Two, do you have a very clear outcome in mind of what success or failure is? And three, for something where we're building, we're taking one small step in a line of hopefully many steps, are you thinking about metrics in a way that will help us to decide whether to keep investing, change course, or stop investing? And, that sort of journey has been nonlinear for us. And I would also say that among my team, there are different maturity levels of teams that are very outcome and metric oriented and teams that are kind of just learning how to go and do that. And so that journey has had to happen in conjunction, again, with product and engineering. It always goes back to we can't drive that outcome alone. So I might have a hypothesis that for this feature, I assume that this user is doing this and they have this many of these things. And if I build this feature, this will go up or go down. In order to even determine that, you have to make sure that that's instrumented. Like, are we even collecting that data? Is it reliable? Is it sanitized? Is it in a way that I can actually go and look at it? And if we build it, will it be measured in the future in a way that's sort of useful? And that grammar is something that we really had to go and learn. We had to go and educate ourselves. And a lot of that came with just basic training, really investing in, okay, how do you become more metrics or data driven? What is the difference between analytics and behavioral telemetry? And the outcome of that is really starting to think about, in the handoff that we do between design and engineering, we hand off a set of questions, or in some cases, a telemetry spec to them. I really care about, is the user doing this or this or this in the user experience? I have a hypothesis that if this happens, we will see a correlation here. And some of that happens with the designer themselves, some of that happens between design and research because it's based on a prior insight or hypothesis that we have. And so that behavioral telemetry is super, super important to us. And so what often happens is we will have this spec, we'll have this hypothesis, and it will get instrumented in a tool like Amplitude, where we can go and look over the course of building this, the course of beta and release, did something happen that we expected, or was it unexpected? And we need to go back and reverse that. And that is very contextual and specific to the thing that we're doing. If I zoom out a little bit more, I mentioned things like adoption are really, really important to us. And we think of adoption as a funnel. Because the product that we sell is an enterprise product, oftentimes in between us and the end user, there might be an IT admin who's deciding what experience that end user has. And so we think about, we've built this capability. How many customers is it relevant to? How many have turned it on? How many have tried it, and how many have used it, and how often do they use it? That funnel it can be different depending on the feature or whatever, but generally that sort of holds true. And so for every investment we make, we really try to understand that picture of, because if you just focus on absolute usage, like daily users, weekly, monthly, etc., you might get you might be looking through kind of like a keyhole about this feature, and that, oh, adoption, absolute usage is very low. Well, how many admins have turned it on or turned it off? Okay, how many orgs are actually eligible to go and use that? So you really got to understand that whole funnel, because otherwise you're going to maybe miss an important insight. Like, actually, the problem is not the end user. The problem is that we didn't do a good job making sure that an IT admin would enable it. And so we have to sort of think about that picture. And then again, zooming out from the business perspective, yeah, I'll be honest with you, the metrics that the business runs, you might find yourself, those are already defined for you. In fact, if you're the first chief design officer or first senior director of design or research within your org, again, that process existed before you, and those might be very well defined. And if you're a SaaS business, there are a set of 18 or 20 things there that are very standard about, monthly recurring revenue, in quarter renewals, churn, NPS, CSAT, those kinds of things. And I found myself in that situation of, how do I support and fit into that framework of how my senior executives, the ELT, and ultimately Cisco think about the health of our business? How do I contribute to those? How do I understand those? And only until you do that, you can really start to influence those of like, well, instead of doing that, let's do this. One of the debates we have in my team is NPS versus CSAT. NPS is not a useful user experience metric, although in prior iterations of the team that I'm in, it was seen as a user experience metric. And it was seen as a user experience metric because you would get verbatim comments about the user experience. But many of those things are not actionable to us. The way that the product that I build is sold, it's not purchased by the end user, it's purchased by someone else. So asking an end user, would you recommend a product that you didn't buy in the first place, wasn't super useful to us. And so for us, getting CSAT in place is far more useful. For us, we use CSAT in very targeted ways. There are very specific behaviors that we look for a user to go and take. And when they take those things, then we ask them, how was your experience when you did that thing? It is much more fine-grained and tailored and situational. And that was a huge win for us. Now we're looking at other things like reporting up SUS as a metric of system usability scale, as a metric of the health of the user experience. of our product. And there are opportunities for us to kind of do an automated collection of sus, and then we do benchmarks quarterly, biannually, where we're doing a more comprehensive look at sus across the product.
Wow, thank you for such a detailed answer. It was really, really helpful. And I can imagine it's much more complex than what you try to summarize in a short amount of time, but it's really helpful to see how you balance the design metrics that you need to look at. And again, the KPIs that are given to you by the leadership team most of the times. And as you said, pretty standard for a SaaS industry, but then you need to link what you're doing to these big metrics that are happening, which is not an easy job.
It's not an easy job.
And are there any particular KPIs that you have as a chief design officer? So again, going back to that conversation about the promotion and that you need to deliver, obviously, I assume you're assessed on these business metrics, but are there any other metrics around things like culture and anything else that you feel like, I don't know, design quality may be something that is not as focused on the outside user in the business, but more internal as you as a leader of organization? What metrics do you have as a leader?
That's a great question. And in my situation, because this role didn't exist, they weren't given to me, which is, I think in many ways, I mean, depending on how you look at it, that could be really scary or really freeing. And I kind of found it a mix of both, of like, again, raising my hand and say, I will be professionally accountable for the success of forming this new role and this new team, but also having no idea of like, well, am I doing it right? Like, how do I know? And this is again coming back to, my belief of the scope of my responsibilities are people, product, and process. How do I influence the design of our product? How do I ensure that I'm growing talent here and we're doing good work and we're delivering? And how do I influence the ways that we work? And that didn't come overnight. Like I mentioned, I really focused on just looking down and focusing on the team for a year or two. And then I focused on, well, the relationship between the teams and how are they working cross-functionally. And then most recently, okay, how are we working as an org? Product, engineering, design, how is that experience like together? And we look at things like specific metrics that we care about, that we measure. Obviously, things like the diversity of my team. How many, what is the makeup? How many non-white men do we have in leadership roles? How many people are we promoting? Where are the sources of where we're hiring? What does my org tree look like? And if you're not familiar with that, org tree is from, new university hire to senior leader. That you should have a lot of people in early in career and fewer people in senior career. What does that look like for me? I also ask things and we measure things like, how often do you consider leaving? Would you recommend a fellow practitioner working at Cisco? Would you recommend a fellow practitioner working on Travis's team? And so we really try to look at this objectively in terms of that, what is the shape, size, and makeup of my team? And then subjectively, what is your experience like? And do you trust Travis as a leader? And do you feel like you're doing your best work here? Those things were not given to me. Like I really had to think about those and advocate that they get adopted at a bigger level. Now, if this role existed before, maybe it would be different, but because it didn't, I had both the freedom and like the pressure to go define what those was. And I will say that to me, success is not just about improving those scores, but again, the adoption of that methodology being adopted outside of design. The fact that product and engineering also cares about ways of working and do you consider leaving Cisco as something we talk about now annually. I am super proud of that, being able to influence and have that conversation, bringing that human-centered perspective to this very engineering business-centric culture. I'm really proud of that.
That is incredible. Thank you for explaining. I like this people, product, and process as your main areas and responsibilities. I feel like it helps probably to focus as well your time and attention to make sure you're not dragged into any one of them for too much, for too long. And actually, because if you think of the metrics and objective for each of them, you can make sure you spread your time and attention across all of them. Would love to shift from conversation about metrics to conversation about skills. That is another probably top asked questions from of all times about what do you need to know when you are at the C level. And you already mentioned a few things that you do look at spreadsheets more than at design work, and that is part of your job is being a business person. And I love that you mentioned that there are incredible design skills that you do bring to the table, like this human-centered approach and empathy that is very core to design. Would love to hear a bit about the skills that you did not have. What particular things you had to learn that when you realize, okay, now I'm using it more like I'm nailing this job, like I'm so good because I know this, whatever thing, skill, whatever it
Yeah,
is.
I hope to achieve that feeling someday. Depending on when you ask me, I might say I've nailed it, and then other times I'll tell you I don't know what I'm doing at all. I mentioned at the top of the hour that I had kind of a career crisis and became a product manager. I think any creative, if you ever have the opportunity to do that, you should totally do it. And there are a lot of skills that I learned as a product manager where, one, I am accountable for deciding what we do, when we do it, and making sure that we take it to market and it lands in the hands of a customer. And while I had intuition about how that actually worked, I had to learn a lot about that. And, for me, that sort of realization was, one, like it doesn't end in Figma or Sketch or whatever tool you're using. Like that's actually not the end. The end of it is when a customer has it and they've adopted it. And there's a lot of steps in there as a creative were out of my purview. And I had to learn very quickly. And those are extremely relevant skills, whether you remain a practitioner or a principal designer or you become a design director or whatever, having that vocabulary, it feels like a superpower because then you can explain it to your team and you can make trade-offs and decisions around staffing and resources among your team. I will say my other experience there is that part of the difficult role of being a product manager is you don't write code. You don't do design. Your only job is to influence. If you want to change priorities or do this instead of that, you have to go line up a whole bunch of people and say, yes, we're going to go do that. And I'm accountable for us being successful at that. And that skill is so important. Again, as your career and leadership grows, you're less and less hands-on. You rely more and more on being credible, communicating a vision clearly, and influencing people to do it on your behalf, on your word. And that, I think, while I felt very prepared, I've done lots of like presentations and slide decks and things like that. It's a little different than that. And you develop a set of skills just around, again, who do I need to go influence and what's at stake for them? And how do I take their perspective and how do I read it back to them in a way that they understand and will go and execute on? The kinds of things that you're working on, they might require tens or 20 or hundreds of people to go and do that. That's oftentimes you're not just saying the thing once, you're saying it many times over and over again. And I felt like in a product role, I got more exposure and more appreciation to how hard and how nuanced, but super important that is. So that's a set of skills I use every single day. Just how do I go deliver a message, have clarity of vision, help people understand trade-offs, and talk to them in a way that they get really excited and passionate about. On the business side, again, it was getting really intimately familiar with not just what these business metrics mean, but what are the impacts of those. In our case, we're a SaaS business, and there are things that are lagging indicators or leading indicators, and understanding the difference between those, and understanding the impact of a metric like bookings today. How does that influence revenue tomorrow? Or the fact that my business, customers sign up for contracts that are 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. How does that renewal cycle kind of affect how people shop around in our product? And a lot of that was talking to salespeople or customer service people, listening to customers at renewal time and understanding what their concerns are and how they think about making a decision. That for me was a big aha moment. In enterprise software, I mentioned this earlier, but the end user is not the buyer. And I had to learn that lesson multiple times of like, I have to be focused on the end user, but at the end of the day, they're maybe not making a decision. So how do I think about the admin and the CIO and understand those things? So I think that set of skills just around communicating with clarity and then understanding the near term and long term impacts of our business, all of those things again lead to me being able to show up in the room with credibility, but also make sure that the decisions I'm making or the things that I'm accountable for, I understand what's at stake, and I kind of know what to look for. And I think for those of you in the audience, that's a journey. Like I didn't learn that overnight. I made a bunch of mistakes. I got a bunch of things wrong. I had to try things and they didn't work. And that took years. Like it took a long time to go and do that. But if you do that, you will be someone who is seen as relevant to the business, and your input is relevant to the direction of the business that you're accountable for. And you'll be given opportunities to solve problems at a bigger scale. If you can think about those two sides of how you communicate and how you tie those to the business.
I love these examples that you given. You're so right that often when we don't see the full picture and suddenly you see the full process of what happens after your job is done to how it gets to the customer and how many other things you have to consider and potentially need to think about and understand to make sure it's a success for the business. And you're so right. Part of it is also having the vocabulary to communicate all of that, whether it's leading indicators and lagging indicators or anything else. What are there any particular words or terms or things that you felt like you had to learn or were the most helpful to know, including lagging indicators or anything else that you realize you're using more and more in the conversations with the business team and the leadership team, and it really helped to translate what you did as a designer, as a creative, to people who don't understand anything about design?
Hard. That's a great question. It's hard for me to pick one, but certainly that act of really getting in. So one of the things my business does is we do like monthly business reviews and quarterly business reviews, and they're very different. Yeah, obviously different time slices of the business, but we talk about things differently at each one. And so understanding the basics of bookings, revenue, churn, and how my business quantifies growth. I think those are the four most important things to me, because then I can go take them back to my team. And so I think as in the dark that I felt, or unprepared as I felt having those conversations, you could imagine if you're a researcher or designer whose job really is focused on being a practitioner, you're probably even more unfamiliar with those things. And so learning those things enables me to go and take them back to my team and say, hey, we're doing this, and this is really important because this is a churn driver for our business. And the reason that that's important is because it's negatively impacting our growth. Or we have this kind of customer who are wanting to migrate to this thing. Those in quarter renewals are really, really important because they turn into quarterly revenue for us. Like just having, it's hard to pick one thing, but like those four things are really relevant. And I'll say another thing, we're a publicly traded company. One of the other things that has been transformational is I put a calendar hold on everyone's calendar to listen to our earnings. Just having our researchers and designers and writers like hear our CEO and CFO talk about the business, hearing what questions the analysts ask about our business, may not necessarily impact their day to day. Just having that awareness of and that reminder of, what we do matters on a quarterly basis. And if there are decisions that have to get made, like you hear it from the source of like things went really well, we exceeded expectations or we missed expectations, we're going to do something differently. All those things are, again, just little things that I'm trying to do to make sure that it's not just me who thinks about the business. Like the more people on my team who think about that, the better we are. And then the more prepared that they are in their career as they grow into future leaders to sort of make that leap into business stakeholder.
Oh, that is so brilliant. I love that you mentioned that you encourage your team to listen to the financial reports and earnings. And we actually just had a conversation with some of the curators of our mini MBA course that we run, which is specifically focused on the language, that it is probably the thing that designers don't want to learn the most, the language of finance, looking at the numbers, financial reports, something that just has the eek reaction from everyone, but probably the thing that will make the biggest difference in how they see the company, the impact that they can make in the company. So definitely learning the vocabulary, understanding the finance, no matter how boring it might sound, it's probably the biggest thing you can do for your career. I would love to talk now a little bit more about your personal, I suppose, experience also being a chief design officer. And specifically, were there any days that you felt like it is too much? Was there, on an emotional level, again, rationally sounds like great. You focus on metrics, you do these things, you convince the leadership, you show the progress, great, but we all are humans. When was the hardest day in your chief design officer journey so far? What was on your mind there, and how did you get yourself out of that?
I've never necessarily felt like this was too much, but I've certainly felt very lonely. And I saw one of the questions about asking, do I connect with other CDOs? I think it can be very lonely. And I would say that's not unique to design. I think as you grow in your career and become more senior as a leader, people are less willing to give you feedback. Like I think I found myself being, suddenly managing what was a peer. And that relationship kind of instantly changes and you get less feedback as you grow as a leader. Like that sort of hands-on, someone telling you or guiding you through every detail of your role and giving you those signals of you're doing well or you need to change. You're more on your own the more senior you get. And again, that's not necessarily unique to design or research leadership. That just comes with it. On top of just my company never had anyone in this position before. And so I think if I could sum it up, there are many moments of it just feeling very lonely and feeling very insecure of like, am I doing it correctly? And of the successes that I'm seeing, are they successes that the business cares about? Like, do they value the fact that my team loves working on this team? Like, does that matter in the grand scheme of things? Luckily, it does. But I certainly let myself go there of like, am I focused on the right things? Like, who cares if people like me as a manager at the end of the day? That was a definitely, I have gone back and forth of periods of like being really confident that I'm doing the right thing and then really insecure of like, does this matter in the grand scheme of things? And I think that's normal. And I will say the way that you combat that is you need to find yourself a mentor. You need to find someone who's not a manager, who you can create that relationship based on safety that you can be vulnerable with. And ideally it's another CDO, but it doesn't have to be. It could be someone else. I think the hardest moments for me, I mentioned a lot of my personal growth and my new accountability is that I am a business stakeholder. And businesses make priority decisions all the time. And that sometimes results in there's this thing that was really important that's not important anymore. And you just stop working on it and you abandon it. As much as you love the work or as interesting as the problem is, like a business decision is made. And then I would say any of you who worked on a tech company, layoffs are common. An idealism that comes with that, if we're doing good work and people like us and we're delivering outcomes, we're safe. And the reality of that is that we all work for a business and businesses make business decisions. And being in that position to deliver that news to my team of like, for the sake of the business, we're making reductions in headcount or whatever that, whatever the decision means. It's a necessity of the job that I never look forward to. And so, having to do that is definitely kind of a low point. But I will say, um, you know, the opportunity there as a leader is that you have a team that will go forward with, and you need to make sure that you're showing up for them. Of why should we keep doing this? Why is your work still relevant despite saying goodbye to your colleagues or whatever that change is? Like those two things are just they kind of ebb and flow for me, where I have high points and low points, and where I feel like I need the most assurance and mentorship, just making sure that I'm staying focused on on the fundamentals of being a leader.
Oh, thank you for sharing this. And I can so relate to so many things that you mentioned, from the fact that the more senior you get, the harder it is to find honest feedback, but also support and people you can share honestly what you're thinking about, what's going on in your mind and what's happening in your teams, and finding those peers, mentors, just people that you can talk to who understand you. I mean, family is great, but who will actually understand what you're going through, and potentially could share their perspective as well. Maybe not the right answer, but at least a perspective and experience or something. It's so valuable. And yeah, I think it's well, this is why we exist as Futureland Academy, to bring people together that can have those conversations. So I'm very happy to hear that you found that valuable to find mentors. How does the CDO role and team connect to R&D and or innovation team, as well as budget?
Thank you for the question. It's central. I mean, it's central to sort of R&D. I mentioned, and one of the things I really like about working at Cisco and in collaboration is that equality between product design and engineering. If you think about, if you work backwards from, what lands in the hands and adopted by our customer, everyone has a really important role to play in that. From a design perspective, one, you sort of take this very human-centered approach of what problem does this user have and how are we going to go and solve that? And what insights or unmet needs are there available? And we do, half of that is, one, we're executing on a set of priorities that have already been agreed upon, but also looking forward into the future and saying there's a different way to do this, or, instead of doing it this way, let's go sort of orthogonal to that and do it this way instead. And that is a very defined process within my team. In fact, my product and engineering counterparts look to my team to, again, deliver on the priorities we've agreed to, but what are we not thinking about? What opportunities are there that we are missing? And, how do you leverage generative research and concept testing and prototyping to go and do that? From an engineering perspective, they're really rooted in feasibility, quality, performance, scalability, like all the ilities. That's really important. Again, I can have all the great ideas, but if we can't build it and it's not reliable, it doesn't matter. And then from our product perspective, is there a customer for this? And will it generate revenue? And how do I ensure that in a market, our market is very competitive. How do I make sure that it's standing out and customers choose us because of that? All those things, everyone has a role to kind of play in that. And that goes from individual practitioners and how they work together to design directors, because they're also stakeholders in the areas that they own. And then from my perspective, how am I thinking about this as a whole portfolio? What design investments are we making? What opportunities are there to go and innovate? And how do I go, find allies and advocates in product and engineering to go and raise their hand and try this with me? But it's very, very central.
Just a quick follow-up on that question. Am I right to say that you don't have a separate innovation and R&D team? It's more embedded within engineering team and within a design team, or do you have a separate innovation and R&D team somewhere within the organization?
We don't. There are pros and cons to doing that. And I would say, the success of those depends on the maturity and the needs of the organization. I've seen them work and I've seen them not work. One of the things that is hard is that, though, those innovation teams, for lack of a better term, in the sense of Cisco, it's really important that our products grow and scale to planet size. I mean, and so that pipeline of when an innovation is created by the innovation team and then growing up into a solution that scales the size of Cisco, that's really hard to do. Like, those are different kinds of skill sets. And so we've experimented with things like that, but really we try to encourage that innovation to happen within the teams themselves. And there are cultural things that we do to encourage that. I think, one, it's really important that product design and engineering feel a sense of safety, that I can go and try something new and it works and great. And if it doesn't work, that's sort of part of the job, is trying something and ruling it out very quickly. We also do, I mean, like hack days. We recognize innovation very regularly in our team, and those are like certificates and awards and teams getting to show up at all hands and town halls talking about the thing that they tried that worked or it didn't work, but they learned something important from it. And then also robust like tools like patentathons. So like you can make both work. The size of our organization, having a separate R&D team or separate innovation team, just it doesn't scale well.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for answering. Love this. How can designers express their goals for growth or transition from visual design to design leadership or management without undermining current leaders when such roles do not currently exist within the company?
I love this. My one advice, maybe my second thing to take away from this, the first one is if you ever get a chance to think like a product manager, go do that. The second one is you should advocate for yourself. You should never miss an opportunity to advocate for yourself. And if advocating yourself comes at the expense of your manager, they're not a great manager. And you should do it anyway. As a leader, I tell my team this all the time. I am constantly trying to work myself out of a job. And I sincerely mean that. And what I mean by that is that I want to make sure that, if I think about the things that I'm responsible for, the list of things that only I can do, or the list of things that someone else could do, that list of only things that I could do should be really small. And by doing that, one, it's ensuring that I'm focusing on the right things, but two, it's ensuring that I am focused on the growth and development of my team. I want to give them opportunities. I want to opportunities that challenge them to grow. I want to give them skills, training, exposure. I want to, there have been experiences in my team where I've actually encouraged someone to switch roles, or they become a director back to a principal designer, or they've actually moved outside of my team and ended up coming back. Like that comes with being a leader, and that should not be scary. That actually means you're doing your job. And so your question of should I advocate for myself, become a visual designer to a leader? Yes, you should. There's no bad outcome to this. Because what's going to happen is, again, if your manager is territorial about that, that's a really important data point for you, just career wise. Like, might not be the right manager for you. The other outcome is that, hey, I think this is a great proposal, but you're not ready for it, is also a great outcome, because then the conversation becomes, well, what do I need to do to get ready? Or option three is it might be a total surprise. Actually, I need a design leader and I think you're a good fit. Also a great outcome. There are no bad outcomes to this. And a big part of what you should be doing is, I think it's really important to talk about when you're proposing a new role or creating a new role for yourself or positioning yourself for a different title. I think you start with one, what is your understanding of what the role needs? What is the role? Who is an ideal for it? Ideal fit? What skills do you think are needed for that? I think start with that and demonstrate your understanding of that role, because that's an important jumping off point in this career conversation. Because again, you might get, actually, you're totally right. I wasn't thinking about this, or you're sort of right, but you're missing this. That's great info for you. Once you've established that, then I think it's your chance to sort of celebrate, well, because I have these skills in visual design, I have incredible attention to detail, or whatever those things that make you unique and special that your leader might not get from another candidate in this role. That is your chance to celebrate it. But I would always lean in and have this conversation. It could be good for you and you get the role, or it's important data for you that you need to grow. Or if it turns out the role is not a good fit and you maybe go elsewhere in the company or elsewhere outside of the company, you have prepared yourself to have that conversation of why you should be a leader.
Love this. Thank you. This is very inspiring and encouraging. You just have so many great insights on how to progress within the career that we want more of it. So Miriam is asking, I created and planned the org for having a CDO, a CXO role and structure, created a designers network at Volkswagen. How did you make sure if you are the right person for this job as a newbie?
It's really scary. And again, I will disclaim that I made lots of mistakes here and had lots of assumptions that were challenged and not the right ones. And so I think mentally being prepared for that is super important. But I think coming back to where we started the discussion of, do you start top down or bottom up? The answer is both. And I think you focus on the things that you can affect. And if someone asks, hey, is working with your team a positive experience? Do you make engineering more efficient? Have you positively contributed to building the right thing? Like, are you delivering experiences that customers love? You want to make sure that people think of you when they ask those questions, or a senior leader is going to get a positive answer. And if that is not true, you will not be successful, because you don't have the credibility or reputation or influence to go and sort of do this kind of at scale. So I would make sure that you're really focused on that first. And then I think, beyond that, you got to find the person who can organizationally make it happen. And you really have to bring them a well thought out proposal of why this would better. And again, in my case, is really focused on the 3 Ps: people, process, and product. The product will get better, the design talent will get better, and how we work will get better. And I have hypotheses and case studies for as many of these as possible. If you can line those things up, that leap, you will have the right to have that conversation. And I will say this one more time, you will have to have it more than once. The first 3 times I had this conversation was like, I like where you're going. I agree with some of your points, but not now. Or I like where you're going, but like you haven't thought about this. Or, hey, when I ask someone about, does Travis really understand where our business is going? I didn't really get an answer that was great. Those are the things that you have to sort of go and think about, because for the stakeholder whom you need to go influence, this is a big decision. Like, there's potentially organizational disruption that will occur because they're moving people or consolidating people around. You will be in higher profile, higher stakes meetings, and they're vouching for your credibility to go and do that. So I think you focus on building that reputation, building that credibility on the things that you can go and influence. And then you need to go find who can give you a yes at the end of the day.
Brilliant. And just one last question on the promotion. Do you think there is a pathway for senior level individual contributor to become CDO or head of design? Or should one transition to the manager pathway ASAP?
That's a highly individual decision. One of the things that we accomplished here in my role is, if you wanted to grow beyond a senior designer here, you had to become a director. And becoming a director becomes with an expectation of running a big team. And that's not the right fit for everyone. And so we now have a path to principal designer. So principal is a non-managing director. So it's the same compensation, like the same kind of benefits of that, but this person is really focused on like the depth and application of their craft. And that's the disambiguation point of like, do you want to continue to go deep on your craft, or do you want to influence and scale your design leadership, your point of view, your ethos, your philosophy, and potentially be accountable for business decisions and managing a big team? And I would say, if you're sitting as an individual contributor, like, you really have to think about that, because it's not just about having great ideas and being good in Figma anymore. In fact, you'll do less of that. And so I think if you're not ready for that, or if it's something that's not professionally interesting or fulfilling for you, I would think really hard about that. And if leadership is not for you, then maybe you should be thinking about becoming a partner or principal designer or whatever kind of senior individual contributor looks like for you. I will say, none of these are one-way decisions. In my own organization, I've had people go from practitioner to manager and back. I've had people go from director to principal designer and back. And like, those are okay. It's like, it's okay to try things if you're not really sure. But I think if you're thinking about, I'm an IC now and I want to become a CDO, I would encourage you to think long and hard about what skills you will have to gain and what you will be giving up about your craft and your practice along the way.
Well, we are in a conversation of craft, which is, again, a big part of, I think, everyone's design career and upbringing. Would love to also hear a little bit more on whether you still find space for craft at C-level, and if not, how do you find space within your life in general for creativity or anything else that you personally as a human love, and that's why you got into this profession?
I would say yes and no. And I'll maybe dive into that. I think one, part of the job here I mentioned before is being, having influence and being seen as credible. And I think someone who comes from a background of understanding the craft, and can sort of still talk about that and its application, is important to your credibility, especially if this role is being created for the first time, or actually even in someone else held the role and now you have the role. Being a CDO that your researchers or writers or designers can relate to because you speak the language and you understand the tools is super important, but it's not your job. And in fact, it's distinctly not your job. You should not be designing anymore. And in fact, I would challenge you that you're not the creative director as a CDO. You should not be making day-to-day design decisions. You should be delegating that and enabling your team to go and do so. Your job is to clear the pathway for that to go and happen. I try to embody that as much as possible, where my first responsibility is to ensure that design is happening, but I still do monthly and quarterly design reviews. And I do that because one, I have a sense of paranoia of like, if an executive asks me like, how did this design get out there? I want to know what they're talking about. But two, I want to, while it is not my job to make every decision, I want to have teams present to me and talk to me about, well, why did you make that decision? Or what's holding you back from making a good design decision here? And so I do those monthly and quarterly at different scales. So I do assert, my design philosophy. I do those so that I can see the portfolio level design and that's how it's come together, but I am not accountable. I'm not responsible for delivering designs on a day-to-day basis anymore. And that loss of that sort of application of craft, I was really sad about it. And then I stopped being sad about it. And again, I think for me, I'm still a designer. I'm still a creative at heart, but my tools are decisions and influence of people, not CSS and HTML and Figma and JavaScript and those kinds of things. I will say it has created a desire for me to be fulfilled creatively outside of work, that I, lost for a while because I was so pouring everything I had into the designs I was working on. I didn't have anything left. And now for me, like reigniting this sort of love I have for photography, for example, has only gotten stronger. And I rely on that sense of fulfillment as a creative. And, leaving space for that is sort of super important. But if you're doing your job as a CDO, that application, your taste and being able to credibly come across as someone who understands the craft and practice are still super important. But you should not be doing the design. You should not be doing the research yourself.
Well, thank you for this answer, and also for being honest about that passion that you have for design that is not gone, and you found another way to actually practice your creativity in everyday life, and photography is a great way to do that. We have a few minutes left, so would like to finish on a little bit kind of discussion about the future, because we have future in our name. So why not talk about the future of the industry? There is a lot of rumors, or not rumors, but conversations in the design industry. Where is it all going? Is design dead? Where are the CDO roles? Are we all going the wrong direction? What is AI gonna do to us as creatives and designers? Where do you see overall the state of the industry now, and maybe some thoughts or predictions where it might be going? So as a design community, what should we be aware of or prepare ourselves for?
I started my career professionally in 2002, a long time ago. You've seen trends come and go. There were recessions and boom and bust cycles, and I remember, everyone freaking out when like Dreamweaver came out, Macromedia Dreamweaver and jQuery and like all these things that were just going to like make us all irrelevant. And I think on one hand, a little bit of long-term perspective there is really important. On the other hand, you should not insulate yourself so much that you become irrelevant. like that is on you to go and do. And I think I get tired of saying and I get tired of repeating it, but like AI is not going to take your job, but a practitioner with AI might. And that's real. This feels very different than past tools or technologies that have either been forced upon us or that have just emerged and we've found ourselves very unprepared. And so you should be thinking about, you should be having this perspective of not that AI is nowhere near taking my job. You should be thinking about how would I reinvent my role using productivity tools brought about by AI. You will learn a lot. And while it might feel very far away, there are things that are part of your practice and part of your job today that you could fundamentally do quicker or better or faster with AI. And you should be aware of what those are. Because I can promise you in your company, someone is having a discussion of, well, if these tools get better, how does this shape our workforce and our organization? And if you are not preparing for that, thinking about it, someone, I promise you, will. And that shouldn't be scary. That should be, you should be thinking about your own career and your own development. And again, not putting on blinders and insulating yourself to that. I think that's the AI part of it. I think the other thing that we should be thinking about as practitioners, community of practice, as design leaders, the nearest ELT member I report up to, he talks about designers should understand commercial relevance as a fundamental to their practice. And I think about that every day. Business acumen. And I think you are doing yourself a disservice if you are blind to those things. Every one of you, with maybe a few exceptions, you're going to be working for a for-profit company. They are there to make money and return value to shareholders. At the end of the day, we are unremarkable. And I'm going to let the silence just, we are unremarkable in the grand scheme of things. We have passion for our jobs. We love what we do. We're human-centered. But at the end of the day, we work for businesses. And understanding commercial relevance, how the business makes money, why your company is chosen over a competitor, how renewals work, who buys it, who makes the decision. It is such a critical skill for you to learn in your current job, in future jobs that you may have, because you need to be aware of those things. Because one, it might create opportunities for you. Hey, there is a way that we could apply thoughtful design and research to impact our business. And you get the opportunity to make that case and be accountable for it. But also on the other end of hard things, like my business had to make a reduction or we had to change priorities, you understanding the state of the business that led to that will enable you as a leader to go and turn around and explain it to your team in a way that is real and candid and thoughtful to them, but also make sure that you can pick up the pieces and recover and keep moving. I would say the third thing, I think CDO is still a very new role. Like there aren't that many in the world, to be honest with you. And I think it's up to us to ensure that this doesn't come and go, where businesses revert to the way they used to operate, where design is a function of engineering or design is a function of product, and it's all decentralized and we're a service organization. I think it's up to us to kind of prove them wrong. And I followed some interesting discussions on LinkedIn, and that there's a little bit of cynicism among design practitioners of why don't we as design leaders get to focus on stewardship of design? Like, why isn't it just a given that design is important and we deserve to be in the room and we're relevant? Why is that we're always fighting for the right to be in the room? And I understand that cynicism. I am personally not motivated by just being a good steward for design. Like, I really want to be a change agent. Like, I want to change culture. I want to change business. I want to change talent. I want to change all those things. And so I think if you let yourself get demotivated by the fact that this is a new role, we have to prove ourselves probably harder than any other discipline in order to be in the room. I think you have to have a little bit of grit in order to be successful at that. And I think if you can get into that mindset, whether your career is in design leadership or some other leadership role, that is just a universal core skill that will serve you super well in whatever it is that you do as your career grows.
Wow, what an answer, Travis. Seriously, I felt like you encapsulated everything so beautifully about, I think, what's on everyone's mind, but also what we all should focus on. I would love to ask you one last question that we ask everyone who comes on our podcast, which is a bit more of a philosophical question. Travis, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Oh man, if I could change one thing in the world, what would it be? One of the things that I dream about, I have two teenage daughters. They're 15 and 16, so they're going to be entering the workforce um, in 5 to 10 years. And one of the things that's really hard is that we're having very grown-up conversations about like their career and what skills are going to be, again, commercially relevant in the future. When I really want to be talking about like what is your passion and what is your motivation and what will fulfill you. And I think, at least in the US, we don't really have a government or economy or culture that supports that. Like things like universal basic income is just never going to happen here. Societal concepts like that, I think, would enable more people to pursue creative careers or eccentric passions that they have, at least for some period of their life. And instead, I'm focused on like, well, how will you support the lifestyle that you want to have and balance that with doing something fulfilling within your career or at least fulfilling outside of work, uh, to make sure that you're happy and fulfilled. So I think that's one thing I think a lot about of like, would I have taken more creative risks in my life had they not have to be like income generating things, and what impact would that have on society? Like, would it bring about a new renaissance of creativity or humanities or innovations that benefit us as humankind if they weren't necessarily tied to the economic structures of today?
Wow, what a way to wrap up this conversation, Travis. I felt like you leaving everyone with so much food for thought on a practical level and philosophical level, and just trying to reflect on our lives, our careers. Thank you for bringing so many different trains of thoughts and different aspects of leadership, design, future in one conversation. I don't know how you've done it all, but that was incredible. Any last words where people can find you, what they should look for, anything else you want to wrap up?
I would love to continue the conversation. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I try to answer every message that I get. I'm also very boring on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. I really am grateful for the opportunity. Again, I think this being kind of a new territory career-wise, I love sharing lessons learned and mistakes and what to look out for. And I have a huge passion for how do we all develop as practitioners and future leaders. And so I have a lot of energy for this topic and would be happy to answer any questions after this that you all might have.
Thank you, Travis, again. Thanks for being so honest and generous, and even after this conversation. But for now, thanks for joining, and until next time, bye.